Hey gang, today I'm going to share with you the 6 most common legal issues that podcasters face when starting their podcast. Hi, my name is Jim Hart. I'm the founding attorney here at Hawthorne Law, and we help creators like you to protect your business and build something that truly matters in the world. And today I want to talk to you about podcasting and what you need to do to protect yourself if you're building a brand and a business through your podcast. Most of you that are podcasters are probably trying to listen to this information somewhere. Maybe I should start a podcast, I'm not sure. This is going to be really helpful to you, and don't forget to stick around until the very end. I'm going to include a link with a checklist that you can download when you're starting your podcast so that you make sure you don't miss any of these issues as you get up and running. Ready to roll into this? Let's do this. The first issue is a big one. It is affiliate disclaimers. A lot of you who start podcasts, you do so to create affiliate relationships with other companies, or you do sponsored ads and things like that. You need to make sure that you disclose in your podcast that you're being paid for. Sometimes it's obvious. I mean, sometimes it's like, today's podcast is brought to you by XYZ company. They've got this great product that you really should check out. Yada, yada, yada. It's pretty obvious that's a commercial, but it's not obvious it's a commercial. And so you want to make sure that you are properly mentioning and disclosing any type of financial or other type of deal that you have with that company that's paying you to do a sponsorship on your podcast. If you don't, you could be violating some FTC rules. So there's really 2 different types of relationships that you're going to need to disclose in your podcast. The first is affiliate relationships. So if you're including affiliate links in your podcast, you're going to make sure you say, because people are going to be listening to your podcast, they're not going to be seeing written words. You want to make sure that you tell them that this is an affiliate link, that I'm going to get a commission if you buy from this using this link. That's the first way. The other way is through sponsored deals, where companies will pay you to do an ad at the beginning, the middle, or the end of the podcast, and you want to make sure it's clear to the listener that this is an ad. It usually is clear. I mean, people can tell, and so you want to make sure that you disclose that on the podcast. And then the third way that you might have some sort of financial deal with a brand that wants to pay you to post something on your podcast is you can actually do an interview with a representative from the brand to talk about the brand, and then you want to make sure you disclose that you might get compensated if people purchase that product, or you're being compensated to do that interview if that's what's happening. Those are the 3 things that you're going to need to disclose on your podcast that you need to be aware of. The FTC is huge. A lot of people forget that we've got this agency out there that governs and regulates advertising and things like that, and they think it's not a big deal. It is a big deal. If somebody files a complaint, if the FTC comes snooping, if your podcast gets big and you've got a lot of old episodes that you didn't disclose anything, then you can get in hot water, and you want to make sure to avoid that. The second thing, I've talked about this before. I talk about this a lot. There's a huge playlist that I've got right up here that talks about this. It is forming an LLC. The basic idea is, my recommendation is form the LLC when your podcast is making enough money to pay for you to form the LLC. If you've got a whole business and the podcast is just one branch of your business, then chances are maybe you already have an LLC in place. Anyway, and I say LLC, I don't necessarily mean LLC, I mean forming some sort of business entity. So that could be a corporation, an LLC, a more structured partnership, something like that. Just make sure you have something in place. The most common example of what we see and what we use is an LLC or a limited liability company. That's what I've done most of my videos on this channel about. But make sure once your business or brand starts making some money through advertising or through selling products or through consulting or whatever it is that you're doing, make sure that you start to set up that LLC. And I will let you know, I'm putting together a course right now on how to set up your LLC, and if you want to get on the waiting list for that, just click the link up here. So the third thing you need to be aware of are legal disclaimers. So you want to make sure if you're giving away advice on your podcast in the form of business advice, medical advice, professional advice, dieting advice, anything like that, you want to make sure that you tell people that you're giving advice, that you're not their doctor, you're not their lawyer, you're not their accountant, you're not their dietitian, you're not anything like that. You're just giving them advice. If they want advice from a professional, they have to go seek out a relationship with a professional that they're going to have to pay to get professional advice to make sure that whatever you're telling them is appropriate for their situation. So the difference between me telling somebody that they need an LLC is a good idea for your business and legal advice is I look at your situation, I look at the facts of your situation and say, okay, in this situation, because you're doing this, this, and this, I think an LLC is correct for you. When I tell YouTube that I think an LLC is correct for the majority of business owners, it's general advice. It's not legal advice. It's not particular to your situation. If you want to file an LLC, cool. If you don't, that's cool. It's up to you. I am not your lawyer to tell you to do that. But that's what you need to have, some sort of disclaimer that lets people know that you're not their whatever, and you need to tell them that in the podcast or in the show notes, or preferably in the podcast and the show notes that will be posted on your website. Cool? Got that? Give me a thumbs up if you like what I'm saying. Type down below, got this, I got this, if you understand what I'm saying right now. The fourth thing, that's not four, that's three. The fourth thing that you want to think about if you are trying to monetize and build a brand around your podcast is intellectual property, and you want to make sure that your intellectual property is protected, and typically this is done through a trademark application, and so you're going to file that trademark as soon as possible after you start getting some traction with your podcast. And if you're going to start selling products under your trademarked brand, you want to make sure that you've registered that trademark. So it's probably the cheapest, most valuable asset that you can get for your business, because if someday you decide to sell your brand or your podcast or whatever, if the people that are coming and they want to buy your brand, they're going to ask you, did you trademark that brand? And if you didn't, that's a big problem. So you want to make sure you do that. It's a very inexpensive asset to acquire for your business that will pay you many, many dividends later on. Fifth issue that we see that you're going to need to think about with your podcast, specifically if you're doing interview podcasts, which a lot of people do, is you want to make sure you have contracts in place with the people that you're interviewing that basically allow them to waive the right to any copyrighted material from the interviews, because they are helping you to create that work. They are technically a copyright holder, or they have an interest in that copyright, and you want to make sure that they've waived that interest in that copyright, so that if you did want to use that material in any sort of way, they can't come back at you and say, wait a minute, I didn't know you were going to use this in a course, I didn't know you were going to sell this material, anything like that. You want to make sure that that's all your ducks are in a row there. So you want to make sure you have a contract in place that protects you and that waives their interest in that material, and it makes clear that you own the copyright to the podcast. And typically the way most people do it is they'll send them an email and say, by getting on the podcast you confirm that you do agree to all this, but you can also use services like Adobe EchoSign or HelloSign or DocuSign or whatever, one of those, and have people sign an electronic contract that basically before they come on your podcast they understand that they're waiving those rights. So the last issue, which is somewhat of an issue but not huge, is copyright issues. So if you're using clips from other podcasts, or if you're using music clips in your podcast or things like that, you want to make sure that you've acquired the proper licenses and permission to do that. A great way to do that is to use a service like Epidemic Sound. There's a link below. It's not an affiliate link. I do not have an affiliation with them, but that's the company I use and recommend, and I like them. But they're great for music. There's other services that are available for music if you're looking for music for your podcast. Also, if you hire somebody to do the intro or the outro for your podcast, typically you're going to make sure you get a waiver so that you own that intellectual property as well. And then you just want to make sure that you don't steal other people's content. So if you are listening to a podcast and you really like something they have to say and you want to take some of that clip and put it into your podcast, I would reach out to the podcaster and just say, hey, I want to comment on something you talked about. Do you mind if I do that? Oftentimes they'll probably say yes because they're going to want you to attribute it to them and it'll help them get more listeners. And if they don't, then right away you've got a problem, so you don't use it. That just avoids any problems, and that's a lot easier than going through one of the big studios. A lot of podcasters are still small, and some of them are. Some of them are big. You've got the NPRs and the bigger brands like that. But for the smaller podcasts, usually not a huge deal. Before I get to the surprise I have laid out for you that I promised at the end of this video, I just want to take a minute to remind you again to give me a thumbs up, hit the button down below to subscribe, and hit the little bell thingy to make sure you get notified whenever we post new content every Tuesday and Thursday. Also, if you know somebody that you think could benefit, if you know a good podcaster who you think is doing things wrong and they could benefit from this information, please feel free to share this video with them and let them know, and I would really appreciate that. Now, as I promised at the beginning, there's a link down below to a checklist that you can get that'll outline all these steps and different services that you can use as you are trying to build and monetize your podcast. So feel free to sign up for that if that's something you would like. I just want to thank you again for listening, for watching, and I hope you have a great day. Go out there and build something that matters.